So it is kind of interesting looking at the Nobel Prize lists, because they're a little bit different because they're out of time in a way, right? Because they're when the prize is given, it's not when the discovery is happening. And so it is kind of funny as I'm looking through a lot of the Nobel Prize stuff. It is kind of like the little test that's in there. Like where does that belong? Like what just recent past transit of Rahu and Ketu is actually affecting that. And there's usually something fairly clear there. It's actually kind of funny how, and I guess I'm in like, we dove into Rahu and Ketu here. And so, of course, I'm seeing it everywhere, but I really am seeing that imprint. It seems just all over everything that's kind of happening in those periods. So let's dive into this. I think I'm anyways, we'll go back to Dhanishta Ashlesha. I think I just let me share the screen with you again. Yeah. It's very interesting. We're getting into that Capricorn Cancer sort of split here now. And Dhanishta is quite interesting because it's very powerful. It's the most heard. And so there's, of course, Rahu and Dhanishta, there's going to be a lot of noise is one of the main things I'm noticing here. It's interesting. I got back down to the whatever the 1800s on this, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you might want to have a little listen to it after the class. Um, you know this marching band thing, the Stars and Stripes Forever? I think they probably play it in just about all the military movies now. And it was a march, right, for the Army March, and it's quite intense. It's very intense sort of a march. And I thought, wow, like, and I'm listening to this, and I'm just like, wow, this is Rahu and Dhanishta. It seems almost perfect because it's so intense. And this is like, well, Dhanishta's like the machine, so it's like you're putting Rahu in there. And I'm imagining this sort of march being played. It's a bunch of soldiers going into war, going into like kind of a certain sudden death. But there is another side to this that's sort of being ignored by that march, and that's the Ketu on the other side in Ashlesha. And I think it's giving a sense of immunity, right? And that's really what Ashlesha does. But these guys are going into the meat grinder sort of the war in a sense, but feeling all this hope and all this power because they're part of something bigger. They're part of this big marching band, and there's all the noise, and the whole thing is meant to sort of uplift them and make them feel like they're immune, right? They're going to be that sort of that hero in Dhanishta, that hero at war in a sense. And so, anyways, kind of things really sort of struck me when I saw that. And that really is it. And the other thing that was really coming up through, and now I'm kind of talking this whole stretch of Cancer and Capricorn, was sort of that sense of the machine, that Rahu over on the Dhanishta side. One of the famous things about Dhanishta, they say when there's malefics there, especially Saturn or Rahu, women hate these people. And I love when classics say this. Women hate them. They're so blunt, right? It's like, oh my God, what do they mean by that, right? You can't really say something so strong and mean it that way. And I think this sort of like it actually really does encapsulate a lot this saying because it's kind of that Ketu, everything here seems to be going against the sort of maternal instincts in a lot of ways. And that more the machine, the production, the intensity of that really seems to be highlighted. Where the home life, I'm seeing a lot of like women's liberation here. We're finding in the wars, the boundaries aren't really being respected here in a lot of ways. Interesting sort of thing on the boundary things. Things like SpaceX started breaking. Let me just scroll down to this. Since I'm talking about this time stuff first, we'll scroll down to it. Um, yeah, we see things like SpaceX. We see the internet get started here. We see things like National Public Radio in the US and CBC in Canada, these kind of public that was giving kind of public access in a way, right? Access to anyone. And there's kind of no boundaries. Now, we're talking about radio, and I can't help but feel, oh, these projects must have got started um, through the Gemini transits. And certainly when I got into looking at the Gemini transits, it was like, wow, radio type stuff was just going crazy. Um, but we're also finding, I think, that sense of no boundaries coming up here. And it's sort of hard to tell with some of these space launches going to Jupiter, going, this other one was going, oh, this is the Hubble. Anyways, we see space, we'll see space stuff through all of this. We see here sort of a lot of that anti-war stuff in the 70s against Vietnam War. That was when the National Public Radio came in. Now, the anti-war thing was, again, it's sort of interesting. It was very universal for one thing. It wasn't like a lot of it wasn't like the race wars we were seeing earlier in the 50s. Um, this was the anti-war protest. It was sort of this universal protests, um, sort of ideas coming up here. There's another thing that was coming up through this transit was here we're seeing UK lifts the restrictions on gold ownership. And so what that did is that would have shot the price of gold way up because suddenly there was a big demand for gold. And here we're seeing somewhere down here. Anyway, somewhere down here, the US government also released, made some changes in the gold, and the price of gold doubled overnight almost. Um, and you'll see that if you kind of read it. Other seeing things like Miss Universe, a lot of hydrogen bomb, nuclear testing, a lot of that sort of stuff. Now, and this is sort of going into that. A lot of the energy is being focused on power and getting power in a sense. And what's being neglected is sort of the home base, the home life in a way. You see that with a lot of the women who had this in their transits. Now I've talked about this before, having a lot of strong women, but this was like a lot of really sort of really strong women's liberation type women, little women's suffrage type stuff, get the women out of the home. Again, that breakdown of the sort of the home structure, the family structure. None of that really seems very important with this Rahu and Ketu combination. Now, if you have no respect for mother, women are going to hate you, right? And that's kind of what sort of seems to be going on here. There's no there's no respect for the mother, for Mother Nature, for the boundaries of the mother here. It's even like you imagine these men marching into war with Stars and Stripes on. It's like, how's Mama feeling about that? Right? Sure, Papa's really proud, but what about Mama? Well, maybe the pride's there, but it's hidden by her tears, you know? And so this kind of thing seems to be some of the energy that's going on with this transit. Yeah, we get some of the psychology. We sort of get the other thing I sort of notice is Catherine the Great is in power, and so you're also seeing some of these sort of unusual sort of characters in power. Like certainly in that time, it was very strange for a woman to have so much power, and she was a great leader, a great sort of role model to look up to. She says, "I shall be an autocrat. That's my trade. The good Lord will forgive me. That's His." Right? Laws ought to be so framed to secure the safety of every citizen as much as possible. Political liberty does not consist in the notion a man may do whatever he pleases. Liberty is the right to do whatever the laws allow, right? So it's that sense of law and order also becomes quite strong here. So we're going to see it supporting a lot of politicians. We're going to see it supporting police officers. It's a supportive transit for a lot of that sort of like, well, those people that women hate, that mama hates. It really supports them. Um, we see guys like Pratapi Joyce. We see some Knut Hamsun has this as well. Um, Princess Maxima of Netherlands. And again, if we look at some of the actresses, like I don't know if you know Rue McClellan. This was like when I was a little kid. This is what we sat around eating dinner or watching the Golden Girls. Um, and these were these like really strong, bunch of strong old ladies. If you like old ladies, like check it out on right back in the early '80s, I guess. right? So it's all these powerful old ladies that are really going against what you expect grandma to be. And that's kind of interesting, actually, you mentioned that it's grandma because, well, Ketu is kind of grandma. And so then I'm wondering about grandma in the home now, and now in my whole, I just opened a whole train of thought there. But that's kind of what the Golden Girls was, right? It was a bunch of these grandmas in the home who were empowered. They weren't like your typical grandma sitting around knitting, right? And so you're getting that sort of thing come up here. Even I was looking at someone like Jean Chrétien as prime minister in Canada, wondering like why was he here? He was kind of involved with the India Act. Um, Again, I'm going to expect anytime I see anything to do with tribals or outcasts, I'm kind of like, that's at Rahu and Ketu. I'm kind of looking at the other thing that was kind of strange about Jean Chrétien being a politician, I think, is he was really ugly for a politician, right? He had the palsy on his face and it was all drooping, and he spoke out of the side like that, and one on the side of his mouth, sort of a thing. And like, it's not what you expect from a politician, from a person with power. Usually they're pretty people, right? And so Rahu and Ketu, I think, are in this position is going to give like these more unusual characters power for whatever reason. But really strong organizers, like this is like these are powerful people, and it's really Dhanishta's interesting, right? Because they're trying to squeeze as much as possible into nothing, and so I think this Rahu and Dhanishta is really like that saying of trying to squeeze blood from a stone, right? In a way, this was what like I see John Dewey's name here, right? And that's what his whole like organization of the library system. It was like just it was really this Rahu and Dhanishta task that he went about doing that. It was really squeezing as much in, and so he had to use numbers, and he made all these codes and really squeeze as much information as he could into just like nothing, just a few numbers that well nobody else can understand but him and a few library nerds, right? Um, and so you get this sort of thing. I think in regards to the politics side of this or the economy side of it as well, it's going to be really like the austerity measure type things, really trying to squeeze the people, right? I picture as well like the boss who's really trying to get as much, really pushing to get as much out of the workers as he can, and they don't even see that there's a home life. They don't even see that there's a private life there, really, right? And so of course then all the wives and the women hate him too. So this the women hate them. I don't know why. It really sticks with me through this, and maybe it's because when I first wrote about it, it was kind of one of the first things I pulled out of the classics, and so I kept seeing it. But I keep seeing that sort of theme running through this a lot. Now, you can't say it's always true because Patrick Swayze's here. Women love Patrick Swayze. There's not a woman alive that doesn't love Patrick Swayze. Well, maybe you younger girls don't know him, but if you're alive back in the day, he was the man. Um, my mama loves him. I grew up Patrick. What was it? The dancing movie he did. That was like my mama's favorite. That was she was all over that. I saw it 100 times when I was a kid. Um, so, but that was also very much about. It was about this changing culture, right? It was like this Patrick Swayze was almost like this insect who came into the rich culture and sort of shook up the way they were doing things, changed the culture, right? And he was really the whole movie is really a theme very much about that. I also have here Knut Hamsun. I talk about him all the time. He's one of my favorite authors. I really love his books. Um, Hunger was so influential on my life. I feel like I'm Knut Hamsun. It's very autobiographical stuff he writes as well. So an increasing number of people who lead mental lives of great intensity, people who are sensitive by nature, notice a steady frequency of appearance in them of mental states of great strangeness, a wordness and irrational feeling of ecstasy, or a breath of psychic pain, a sense of being spoken to from afar, from the sky or the sea, an amazingly developed sense of hearing which one can wince at the murmuring of the unseen atoms, an irrational starting of the heart, some closed kingdom suddenly briefly reveal. And this is like that. I was thinking about that in the Ketu on the Ketu side of this, because Cancer is very psychological, right? And so those psychological boundaries are really getting broken down by this Ketu, I think, as well. And I was really almost one of those sort of spontaneous thoughts that came apart from all of this, but I sort of realized that anyone who's deeply in touch with their psychological being is going to feel like they're insane, right? Because the who we are psychologically doesn't have those same boundaries, right, as the world, and so we're so full of contradictions and things inside that that's sort of that, like they talk about, like you have to go inside and meet your inner madman, right? That's kind of that madman you have to meet inside. And so Ketu seems to be, in a sense, sort of removing those boundaries. And so you're like, God, that book Hunger really, really, really describes it for me, because he's and Knut Hamsun, this is why he was a master, because he was one of the first to really describe those psychological realities. And so the character in Hunger, he's writing a psychological reality, but it's so vivid and so clear that you're not really sure if he's acting these things out in reality. And of course, if he's doing that, then he's completely insane. Um, who else was a really master at this? Samuel Beckett. I do like Samuel Beckett. And Knut Hamsun writes fairly short stuff as well, but Samuel Beckett did a lot of short stories. Uh, and it's a psychological insanity that they're writing, but they keep you in that suspense that you don't know if it's just going on inside the person or outside. It's this really anti-hero characters that you feel so sorry for, but they're completely insane. Anyway, so it's beautiful, beautiful stuff, literature. And so what I'm saying is these people write beautiful literature. There's something very psychological about them. Even when we look at someone like Patabi Jose, and now he's got a lot of controversy about his teachings, I guess, in his school, and the authenticity of all of that has been put into question, both the scriptures that he claims to have learned his stuff by, and his teachings with his guru, Krishnamacharya. And so a lot of his teachings are sort of in question as well. But he was famous. I think his most famous line is yoga is 1% theory and 99% practice. And that really put me on the side of the Capricorn side. Like, do it. The doing side becomes really, I think, really intensified with this Rahu, rather than the feeling side, right? It's like Papa saying, do it, do it, do it, do it. And Mama saying, feel it, feel your heart. And so there's some, anyways. So we get these sort of things coming up with this. Let's go to the other next one here. So now we're getting into more of the Shravana Ashlesha here. And it's funny, I get a sense with all of these that, like, to me, Shravana and Ashlesha seems like the more natural polarity. Whereas the Ashlesha Dhanishta seems like there's a little bit of friction there, right? Like I remember talking about Dhanishta. Dhanishta is like the like greasing the wheels kind of thing, so you can maximize productivity in a sense, right? And so if Rahu is in the grease, it's like, well, I don't know, maybe they're using synthetic oil. This was another interesting thing that came out back in the day, somewhere through this transit. Someone made this was back in like the 50s, I think. And he made a car that ran on an alternate to gasoline. And he started highlighting he had this new alternate to gasoline. And this, I thought, wow, this is really Rahu in Capricorn, we'll say, broadly speaking. Um, but the thing is, it came out later that, and he said it was cheaper and it was environmentally friendly and blah 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 blah. He said all these great things about this alternative. What turned out to be a hoax, because what he was, if you add, I think it's acetylene or something, um, or that nail polish remover. Anyways, acetylene is like for welding, and nail polish remover is completely different. But you add this to water, and it will run on a car will run off. It's not actually cheaper than gasoline, but a car will run off of it. But what it does is it completely corrodes the engine. All that water sort of gets flushed through the engine. It's really, really bad. And so that's sort of what I thought. Like on one hand, we think of like nowadays, a lot of these synthetic lubricants, they're really good. They're like way better than the fake stuff, you could say, or the real stuff. Um, but I think you also get this like this fake oil. Um, I like talking about like the snake oil salesman, and maybe that's really what this Rahu is kind of doing, because there's some because Rahu is fake, right? That's what he's going to do. He's going to bring that element of fake to the fakeness to the rise, maybe in popularity, something fake about the intensity of the production in a way. Um, I say that I'm thinking more of the Dhanishta. It really makes me think of like a hyper capitalism, or you get these jeepers. What's her name? Oh, she wrote wonderful books as well. Um, Not the literary stuff, but like this stuff about like disaster capitalism, um, branding even. What was that book? God, she was brilliant. Klein. She wrote a couple books, really powerful activist movement back in the 90s. Um, and her and Noam Chomsky were kind of hand in hand for a few years. But anyways, this sort of disaster capitalism, this hyper capitalism, this like it's like this idea of we use a GDP, for example, to measure production, and that we sort of use that to measure quality of life as well. But the problem is, as the GDP goes up, I guess in a way the whole project goes up, but the nature goes down, right? It's like that idea of unlimited production, that unlimited growth within a limited planet, right? But capitalism or a lot of these things, they don't see the limits, right? And so they just keep saying, well, we have to. It's the natural way. We have to grow. We have to produce more. We have to use more, and that's always better to the Rahu on that side. Um, so this kind of stuff starts to come out now. We see that again with a lot of the names. Science stuff, I think, really gets highlighted much more on this side. Even in regards to science, we think like even psychology is well, it's a science in a way. And so even if we think that this is a powerful position for psychology, they're still taking those innermost feelings that have no categorization in a sense and categorizing these things, right? In a sense, they're taking things that have no limits and putting limits on them, and the things that naturally have limits, they're taking the limits off those in a way, right? It's like the people who insist that women can do everything a man can do, and then you put a man and a woman in a boxing ring together, right? It's like, well, in one sense, yeah, all women can do everything a man can do. On another sense, we have to respect the limits, though, right? And so this is kind of like, well, it's not really respecting those limits very much. Um, and so we're seeing here, wow, it's amazing to see like Elon Musk, Ranjan Bose, I have to put him. He's the guy who made the Parashara Light software that I use. Mahuiteng Pony, Wusuk Huang, gonna I'm gonna butcher these names. Was a physicist. Who else? Then we get there it is, Julian Assange. But we're getting a lot of like these really like masters in computers, but we're also getting a lot of sort of CIA type involvement here as well. Again, people who don't respect any boundaries in a lot of ways. Um, so you're seeing a lot of this, a lot of military guys, someone like Jeffrey Epstein, you want to talk about not respecting boundaries. Um, he's famous for that. I think Frank Sinatra probably also was too, in a lot of ways. Winona Ryder's an interesting one to see here as well. She was kind of like there's a few people who had these. Oh, she was on the other, just on the other side, but these like female actors as well. She was like in her prime. I think she dated Johnny Depp. She sort of said like, I don't understand it, but her and Johnny Depp are married by word. And sort of, and they both almost have a respect for this sort of like informal marriage ceremony that they did together when they were young. She's also famous for stealing. She's like this, she's a multi-million, she makes huge amounts of money. And she just went to like a corner store and stole like a toothbrush or something like that. I can't remember what it was. Um, but these sort of things, like I don't know, just strange things like this seem to come up. Um, who else do we have here? Again, just more powerful people. Women like Pat Benatar, right? Hit me with your best shot. Um, Michael Jackson as well. No, no, no. This was Michael Jackson's physician. Um, talk about someone who would have no boundaries. Michael Jackson was famous for having no boundaries, odd boundaries. You could just imagine the boundaries of his physician, his advisor, right? Uh, things like that come up. It's interesting to see two cities of Baghdad and Glasgow. Now, I don't know why. I see these two places as being quite similar in a lot of ways. And now I'm not sure about Scottish music. I know some Irish musicians who have traveled to India extensively and studied Indian music quite deeply, or Persian, we'll even say Persian type music in a sense, because of course Indian music's highly influenced from there. But there's a similarity in the roots of their music. And so there's a similarity sort of in the roots of their culture somehow as well, I think that comes out. And so there might be an interesting study there to look into that more deeply, the similarities between Baghdad and Glasgow. They're both certainly like, I don't know, I see them both as being somewhat lawless in a way, right? Or the gangs are maybe the ones making the laws in these places. They're tough cities, right? You don't want to go to either of those places. I don't think unless you're pretty tough. And I think that's been like the history of the city, right? It's not just a thing of now. That's been the way it goes. Um, we see here the Night of the Long Knives. This was also interesting. That's when Hitler sort of took power. He sort of purged everyone, and then about 2 weeks later, and that all happened, I think, through this transit was the Night of the Long Knives, and then there was a he did a referendum right after that. It was like 90% of Germans supported this purge, right? And so it's interesting. Someone else, geez, there are a whole different conversations came up with someone else recently, and they're talking about this idea of like, well, they sort of had this idea that, well, if Hitler would have won the war, then we'd be reading about the US in the awful terms that we read about Hitler in a sense. Um, but he was, and so there is this like, again, the Rahu is intensifying the leadership power, right? And I'm sure there was some like Saturn and Mars was getting in there, but people in generally, Hitler didn't happen in isolation, right? Like people voted for that. He killed everyone, and everybody said, thank you. And in a way, you could almost see that happening in the US right now. Everybody just purging and killing, 20 of the top politicians in the US. And I'll bet you the American people would say thank you. It's very, it's like I don't even know what to say when I see the amount of power and balance. Um, and I don't know, no, we're not having this transit right now, but in today's world, this imbalance of power is really, really strong, and really quite incredible. Um, and so you can see that we see Augusta Pinochet is here, and you see a lot of these sort of things. Bitcoin is interesting to see here because, well, we're used to national currencies, right? And Bitcoin is a It's not a national currency. It has no boundaries. We see, what else do we see? We see the Hubble Space Telescope. So again, something that's really reaching beyond the worlds. This was interesting. A lot of this sort of like the first McDonald's and the first KFC and the first, what was it? Pizza Hut. And there was one more that was coming up. Anyways, these four like big symbols of capitalism in the American way, they started moving into Eastern Europe and China and places like that. The Berlin Wall came down. Now there's a Ketu in Cancer, if I've ever seen one. The disintegration of the wall, quite literally, um, was all happening through this. We see more internet stuff. A lot of that is coming up through here. Um, Things like that, something like the Pentagon Papers. It's interesting that we see way back here. And meanwhile, up further, we're seeing guys like Snowden and Julian Assange and these sort of like disclosures of secret information. Now, this also went to court. The people that released this also went to court, and it went to the Supreme Court. And it was found that they were within their rights of free speech to release the Pentagon Papers. Now, I always get confused between what's going on with Snowden and Assange, but they clearly one is in exile and one is in jail. So times have changed. Um, we see also this kind of war on drugs, and that's an interesting war to see starting as well because it had no boundaries. Like it's still going on. When is the war on drugs going to be won? When's it going to end? So you see these things that have no boundaries as well, kind of starting up in here. Um, this sort of Norway begins oil production in the North Sea. I think that's kind of interesting in a way because then we started to get, I think, a lot of the maritime sort of boundary rights issues kind of coming up. Um, and then we see like that's really, in a sense, that's what the current war in Israel has a lot to do with, is some um, offshore oil stuff that both Israel and Palestine make claims to. Um, Anyways, I don't know. There's so many boundary issues in there, and so you're getting into those sort of like areas where it's a little bit harder to define the boundaries in a sense as well. Right, if stuff comes up. I don't know. Back in 1953, 71% of every television in the US turned into I Love Lucy to watch Lucy give birth to little Ricky. Now, I'm not even sure if I've ever seen an I Love Lucy show, um, but there might be something instructive in watching that episode. It sounds like a big episode on YouTube. Can learn a whole lot about 1950s American culture right there in one 20-minute swoop. But anyways, it was also this idea of like the boundaries issues. It's like when you have no boundaries, you might say like, do you have no shame? And so then you might say like, well, giving birth to a child is one of the most private, most sacred things. And here we are, like 71% of the US just like open the door to that. And now I don't know what happened in that show, if it was a fake childbirth or if they actually had a show of someone back in the 50s. I imagine it was fake, but it was still that sense of where's your shame, maybe. Might be another question when you're asking someone where their boundaries are. Um, Anyways, this kind of stuff. Now we're seeing a lot more nuclear tests, series of 11s. You're seeing hydrogen bombs, so many nuclear tests all through this period. It was just like that was the way to go. And I think that's also like it's like nuclear power is like synthetic power. The way we talk about synthetic oils, we talk about, and in a way, it's like this man-made power. It's not we're not using solar power. We're not using the water. We're using this sort of like, I don't know, you might say it's uranium or it's plutonium or it's these natural products as well. But but it somehow it is a sort of synthetic power. It's a synthetic oil that allows us to get more out of the machine. Our mother nature, I guess, who becomes our machine in this case, allows us to get more out of the machine than the machine was meant to give, in a sense. So anyway, so everybody's scared of nuclear power. Um, it's great for power. It's really bad for the environment. I found interesting Peter Pan came up here. And so it's also this sort of this Doctor Hook figure, I think, is really this Rahu in Dhanishta. And these little fairy children in the home are the Ketu, of course. And again, no boundaries, the Never Never Land. I want to go live in Never Never Land sort of idea. Um, but also Peter Pan is really sort of highlighting the insidiousness of the machine in a way, right? Turning all these kids into donkeys and whatever else he done. Um, that was actually one of the ways I really one of the places. Who is he? Jordan Peterson. Um, God, he gives a great talk about Peter Pan. That was one of my favorite early things I watched about Jordan Peterson was sort of dissecting the meaning of Peter Pan. Really beautiful. Another way, there's a Dhanishta, Rahu and Dhanishta lesson there. Um, and Mr. Potato Head, isn't that Shravan? Like very Shravan, a little bit Mula, right? It's also some root stuff, but it's very of the earth. Um, and so Mr. Potato Head, there's the Rahu of the earth kind of idea. So it's kind of funny the way these sort of things come up through here. Um, you can see I'm tracking all the Great Depression and stuff. And so the Great Depression was like, I don't know if that happens just right exactly here, but there was the Dust Bowl that happened there as well. And that's that like Ketu of the earth literally becoming dust. Um, yeah, there you go. Um, the they called it the surgeon's photograph of the Loch Ness monster, one of those old photograph hoax. So you're seeing a lot of hoaxes. The hoax of there's a skull, Pitman something skull. It was a hoax for like 50 years. This picture was a lot of people sort of figured it was a hoax, but it wasn't admitted until like I think this was in the 90s when they admitted this one. Um, the skull hoax, the Loch Ness hoax. There was another big one. Can't remember. But anyway, some of these sort of hoax photographs sort of ideas were coming up. Uh, it's interesting. The Nazi Night of the Long Knives happened the same time that Bonnie and Clyde were killed by police. And this was interesting. This was a sort of natural born killers was kind of, I don't know if you saw that movie, great commentary on violence in the modern world. But that was sort of I think they pulled from Bonnie and Clyde because these were a couple, they were going around the country murdering people, but they were turned into heroes, right? This sort of like anti-culture culture in a way comes up, I guess you might put it that way. Like this is awful. Like, and that's kind of like you see that in culture all the time. You see like the biggest scumbags are the get the most attention. I talked about that with some of the Dhanishta. The Greek squeaky wheel gets the grease. With Rahu, it's going to be like really squeaky, right? They're going to be really noisy. It's like the shift from the symphony to the marching band, right? Symphonies can be quite pleasant. The marching band, it's like okay, it's music, but really, bang, boom, right? It's pretty noisy too. Um, So you get that. There's Hitler gives his speech justifying his purge. Um, he becomes Führer, 90% referendum. We saw Augusto Pinochet had positions like this as well. It's not like just hyper capitalism, which is fascism, essentially. So it's like, wow, it's very, very fascinating position. Um, oh, silent film inspiration. Another film that came up somewhere through here was oh God, what was that classic? Birth of a Nation. There's another great film, really iconic. one of those old black and whites, right? One of the early films, hugely hugely controversial, kind of that birth of a nation, but it was a birth of a capitalistic sort of pure nation. In a lot of ways, it sort of compared USA to Nazism, to fascism. Um, we see here in the 1915. I don't know the history of all of this, but I guess the Ku Klux Klan by that point was gone. It was kind of wiped out. But here again in 1915, it starts making a return. Um, so again, that's a lot like the Bonnie and Clyde. It's like these people, you're gonna make heroes out of these people, really? And it's like Hitler. This is your hero? Like, what is humanity thinking when this transit goes through? Um, here we go. Darwin's Origin of the Species. Also, it's more. It's like they got that production line of evolution. We've all seen the picture, right? From the little insect, and then we grow, and then you have man, right? But it's like again, it's like that when Rahu's there. It's like Darwin's theory of evolution, but at the end, you'll they show the army man or something at the end. They show that hyper capitalistic creature at the end sometimes to make a commentary. And so that's what the Rahu, it's going to be that, no, it's something extra, right? So here's your evolution, and there's your kind of crazy modern man destroying everything. Um, so any questions, any comments at this point? So we haven't really done this, so we'll stop and kind of look at this chart now at this point. Should compare some of these because there's so much that comes out of this alone. And to be honest, I haven't really looked at this yet. I didn't really get a chance to do much. I didn't get much chance to do any of the deeper analysis here. This week, I just hammered in all the information. I didn't get a chance to really come back and look at this stuff and make sense of it. So I'm just doing it now. So I'm as surprised by half of this as you are. Um, so here with the Shravan and Pushya, we're getting the eagle of Shravan and the donkey of Pushya. And that's kind of funny, actually, because that's really funny, actually, because we often see them the other way around, right? We look at the people who are born with Capricorn and Shravan as the donkeys of this world, and we look at the people who are born in auspicious Pushya as the eagles of this world. So I don't know what's going on. Anyways, so then we're getting that Saturn moon um difference here. And it's funny here because again we're getting the reverse because you're getting Capricorn by sign, you're getting Saturn moon one way, by nakshatra we're getting Saturn moon the other way. And so the donkey and the eagle are like, they're confused. This makes me think though, this is like, and I'm just pulling things out right as my mind goes, but in a lot of ways, this is like Jesus riding into, where was it? It was Jericho. He rode in on the back of a donkey because he didn't want to be the king that rides in on the back of a eagle, you could say. And so you get the king that rides in on the back of the donkey, and so you're getting some of those reversals here in a sense somehow. And we'll see how it comes later. But that's sort of what I said about Jean Chrétien is you're getting this like, it's unusual for it to be this ugly man, a drooping face, and blah blah blah, and he gets to be like king of Canada. I know it's just a little like, it's not king of very much, but still he gets to be king. Um, and you might say the same about Jesus. Rides in on the back of a donkey, and it's like, really, this is the people everybody are celebrating and making king of the world. Anyway, so you get a bit of that sort of stuff. Um, and I know king is all that Leo stuff, but still, there's an eagle here. Um, so, and then you get Vishnu and Brihaspati. And this you would think would be a very good combination because you get Vishnu, who's the governor and the regulator of the universe, with Brihaspati, who's the god of the universe, I guess, the advisor of all the gods of the universe. And so you get the advisor and the king, really. And so it seems like it would be a very nice combination. And this might be the well, what I would expect to happen here, and what we're sort of seeing here, it's something along the lines of Catherine the Great Mother, becomes the great king of the world, and Papa, well, I don't know, she killed her husband. Um, so he was kind of an idiot, right? He was yeah. Anyway, so she killed him, but then you would expect like the husband figure who should be king of the world, ruling everything, you would at home taking care of the children sort of idea, and it's sort of also this idea of like if you look at the saying behind every great man lies a great woman, and I'm sure there's more sayings about the king beside her queen or the queen beside her king, but it's also this idea of sometimes sometimes you don't really know who's running things, right? Because well, there's a lot of truth in that saying of the I guess if you look back in the old days, they might say like, well, the king goes back to his wife and has the most private conversations, and she really sort of she really guides the boss's actions. But I with this position, she doesn't want to rule through the home. She wants to rule through the government, right? Whereas the king might want to rule through the home. In a way, it might be like something like they never say anything good about the sun in Cancer. Right? Sun doesn't do very good in Cancer. The sun really likes Cancer. It does well for the sun, but the Cancer sign that he sits in, the stuff of that all gets destroyed by the sun. And it's like it's even like you're at home and everybody's just sort of enjoying themselves. And then dad comes home from work. And it's like chop chop kids, right? The fun is ruined. Now you've all got to be on your best behavior because dad's here. And the thing is, like, dad's never here. So why does he get any say of anything? Right. But it's like that gets that sort of sense gets intensified here in a sense. And Rahu and Ketu, they always seem to be switching things, making things backwards. So now you're getting this, and Rahu is the sun is kind of like it's our healthy ego. I say this all the time. It's our healthy ego. Right? Ego gets like we beat up on the ego way too much. The ego is good. You should have a strong, healthy ego. You should have a good sense of who you are. That's really like you have to. Rahu is the dark, ugly ego that you read all about the dark, ugly ego. It's not the sun, it's the Rahu. It's that it's the shadow side. It's that he thinks he's king, but it's just the shadow of the king, actually. And so when you get the king running things at home, it's bad. When you get the shadow of the king running things at home, it's really bad, right? It's like not only does he have power, but it's completely gone to his head, right? So that's kind of what Rahu is doing. And then it's like, I keep saying he's running it in the home, but it's like, I know it's the flipping around of the Rahu and Ketu. Anyways, let's just leave it. I can't do it. Um, I give up, Ketu. I surrender. Um, so, and then you get anyway. So we get here as well. You get the nourishing, that really nourishing part of Pushya. And I follow some like Christian women in the home, right? And they're always saying like the woman has to yield to the man. And that's Pushya, the one who yields, right? That passivity of Pushya sort of comes in. Now I know it. Pushya is ruled by Saturn, and we can say all kinds of tough stuff there. But it's that yielding nature, in a sense, is where she gets her power. I guess you could say. That's where the mother gets the power. That's where it sort of comes from. It's through that passivity, and that the mother ends up like, well, the mother gets to rule the home, rule the boundaries, and it's like, as well, it's like the whole reason for the big king trying to rule things in Cancer, you could say, and trying to govern and regulate things is ultimately make things safe at the home front. So it's like the man goes out and into the world and tries to make the whole world safe so that nobody comes back and threatens the boundaries. So mama is just safe in a way. And in a way, that's kind of what's going on there. But now it's kind of reversing the roles of that with Rahu and Ketu. Anyways, it all ends up a mess. So we end up here as well. We got the arrow and the trident to do so in Shravan. And on the Pushya side, we've got the flower. We also, this was another thing, the arrowhead is over there and the wheel. And so you're getting that roundness of Cancer and this more squareness and the straighter lines of Shravan, but Shravan's also the, anyways, half circle, we'll call it. Now, this was another thing through the symbolisms of nakshatras. It's amazing how often the arrow comes up. Comes up all the time. The quiver of arrows, the arrowhead, the shaft of the arrow, the feathers of the arrows, the arrows pointing. And so there's a lot of everybody's pointing fingers at everybody. And I think that in a sense is it's that's a I think that fits here because that's one of the best ways to get power. That's how Hitler did it. It's the Jews' fault. It's their fault. They did it. And so a lot of that also goes out. I noticed even with some of the psychologists here, maybe I mentioned it in the last thing, the behavior psychologies, right? And really trying to use that external world to regulate, I guess, the inner world is I guess what we're doing in a lot of those ways. And that is really what a lot of Cancer and Capricorn has to do, the inner and outer worlds that we experience. This kind of we get Saraswati and King Bali, we get the Shravan, we get the whole sort of step program thing going on with the Shravan, the taking so many steps to achieve things. This is also the stepping upwards, I guess of Capricorn as well comes into that. Um, Knees, sex organs, ears, mouth, lips, facial expressions. Um, we see the facial expressions, and I've been talking about Jean Chrétien with paralysis on one side of his face. Um, so there's a good example of that. I don't know if he actually has. Yeah, he had some of those positions. He had this position, and so you'll see that kept you that strangeness coming into the face. It's really funny that he's coming up today because I was just this very morning I was talking to a friend of mine, a really good old dear Shamanak Shiva Varanasi. Anyways, he's in my heart. We'll put it that way. Um, but he's been dealing with some Bell's palsy for the last few months, actually, and that's what that is. That's sort of like the paralysis on one side of the face kind of idea. And so well, obviously that must have something to do with something. Um, and these sorts of things. We get the monkey and the goat. The goats are almost like we don't have monkeys in Canada. Goats are probably as close as we get to monkeys in this country. They're almost like the goats where there are all no goats because they're both like, well, they're both complete pain in the butt. They're great climbers. Right? That's one thing about monkeys and goats is they go straight up, like nobody's business. Um, yeah, I don't know. We're just kind of brainstorming, right? The Arca tree, which is like a milkwort. Arca tree. Hey, it's like a milkweed, a milkwort, and the people. Um, they're both very holy trees. We look at it that way. The peepal, of course, is one of the holiest trees in India, but the Arca tree is also it's very holy to Shiva, um, and often planted around Shiva places. And here we get the battlefield and in the house. And that's really, and a lot, that's really how we see Capricorn and Cancer. That's sort of the epitome of both of those, is in the house and then out in the battlefield, right? That's how we see the man of the family goes out into the world. That's what he's doing, going out into the battlefield, going to work and fighting and all of that they do out there. Um, you get a light blue and a blackish red, very complementary. Um, that blackish red here, this is really like, really puts me in mind of that like Cali red, that death red, that like almost that, right? Especially the shadowy parts of it, that darkness of it. My where'd that come from? Kamakya in Northeast India. Um, and there to bring up Kamakya in the Northeast India, there's a symbol of, and even a lot of this tantra that we're dealing with. This sort of, a lot of it sort of takes it worships the feminine, right? It puts that at the highest pinnacle of things. And this is really beautiful in a lot of ways. And I sort of, I get why strong Orthodox are like, you're a bunch of devil worshippers. Um, because that's putting nature as the highest. And so it really wants to, what those feminine tantrics want to do is well, they're almost radical. They become radical sort of environmentalists in a sense, because nature takes a higher place than industry. And so it's like, well, we want to progress. We need to plow this piece of land and build stuff for progress. Whereas you could say the feminine worships, they'll say no, 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 don't progress. We want, and what I'm wondering is if we're not going to notice some of that more when we see Rahu in Cancer, where the feminine becomes really strong and wants to hold back progress for environmental causes and things like that. But certainly with this turret combination, we're going to see the power on the masculine side, in that regards. So we're seeing chemists, teachers, athletes, engineers, scientists. It's just really highlighting that whole sort of spectrum of can I say like more masculine thinkers? Am I allowed to say that? Does that even make sense? Anyways, guys like Joseph Stalin, right? And Auguste Pinochet and Hitler had this more really harsh way of looking at things in a lot of ways. Oh, look, Justin Trudeau's there. Isn't that nice? And Tony Blair and these sort of characters, Albert Einstein. I just look at these sort of characters really hardcore. Um, oh, everybody's favorite Edmund Speyer, the guy who brought us oxycodone. That's like one of the most popular drugs of our modern age. And that is a little bit something like oxycodone that numbs the emotions. Isn't that maybe what Ketu's doing over here in Cancer, numbing the emotions to a certain degree so they can go out in the world and act like, I was going to swear, but just not be very nice people. Um, so you get this Nathaniel Hawthorne. I had to read one of his books in English literature class, and I'm really glad they made me read it because I probably wouldn't have read it otherwise. A little stiff writing, I guess you could say. But again, it's that more industrial side of the writing. And his book really, the book they made me read was The Scarlet Letter. And that was, I don't know, it was the woman had the affair and she got pinned with the scarlet letter on her bosom because I always talked about the heaving scarlet letter on her bosom. Um, and it was a very emotional book, but it was really like it was putting all the blame on the sort of on the girl for the affair, and the guy who was involved was still more or less an upstanding citizen, and she got made a complete outcast. That's Rahu and Ketu making outcasts. Um, Here you get someone like Hulk Hogan, or Shaq O'Neal, and they're kind of like this. the almost industrialized sport in a way, if I can put it that way. Right? Like look at Hulk Hogan. He's just the whole line of like Hulkamania. Hulkamania. You don't get any more Rahu than mania in your name. Um, so you get these kind of guys. I haven't written their things yet. Yeah, I started to look at this sort of the real estate cycle. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the 18-year real estate cycle. This is how can you ignore that 18-year cycles? Um, this is really sort of interesting cycle. This is like widely accepted cycle of real estate. And anyways, from what I looked, it seems more or less that this 18, the last cycle that we're currently in, and we started back in 2009. And so we're kind of coming towards the end of that, which towards the end is where it peaks, actually. This is, I should really have a chart. You can look it up really easily, but it's like this 18-year cycle. It starts low and then it rises a little bit, and then there's a little dip, and then it goes way, spends a bunch of years going skyrocket real estates, and then it drops through the floor, and then it starts over again. It's actually, I was thinking about this. This is actually a lot like I can see someone made a comment there, and I don't have my comments up, so sorry I haven't seen it. If you really want to comment, you got to wave and jump around and get my attention. Um, anyways, so it's actually, I was thinking about this and this arc of real estate. It's a lot like a good story arc in a lot of ways. It's a lot like the arc of you don't get it in every story. I don't know if you've read the novel Jane or Eyre. I pronounce that wrong. Beautiful novel. I'm a little bit of a softie, I'll admit it. But Jane Eyre made me cry like a baby. And what it did, it caught me actually, it didn't catch me at the last arc. It caught me at the first little peak, right? It kind of went up like this and it drew me in, and wow, it was so powerful. And then she died. And it just like, for me, the book could have been over. That could have been the end of it. But in a lot of ways, it was just kind of getting starting at that point. And then you had this, and then they brought you to the main climax after that. Um, and so that's sort of, anyways, that's sort of the cycle, the 18-year cycle. And with Rahu and Ketu, this is important because with Rahu and Ketu, and if we're looking at most cycles, and I think our natural tendency with Rahu and Ketu in particular is going to be to look for the reverse happening, or look for like a, I don't know what to say, the reverse, because we will see the reverse. But if this is the low, that we're naturally going to expect the high to be straight across 9 years away. But it's not, it's offset. And I think part of it is because Rahu and Ketu cycles aren't balanced. Rahu and Ketu cycles are out of balance. So Dana asked me something last time, I don't know if it was recorded or not, about the aspects. So here's where the aspects are going to come in somehow important, and I don't really understand it yet, because if the low is now, it seems like the peak is coming when it gives the fifth aspect back to here again. So when it's almost on the way back to this low again is when it goes high. So Dana asked about those aspects, and so the first crash seems to be the first fifth aspect, and the last peak seems to be the last. Sorry, I didn't know I was going to talk so much about this, or I would have got the chart on there. But I think you know what I'm talking about. Um, so well, this is the other thing. We talked about a lot of we're talking earlier about the no boundaries, the radio, the SpaceX going off. SpaceX was like the first private thing going off into space. I saw a lot of sort of telephone stuff coming up in here. WhatsApp got released earlier on in another era of this transit. There was the first coast to coast telephone call in the USA. The telephone seems to be somehow important here. And I think that's maybe because, like, well, in a way, it's like right now, you're sitting at home and I'm sitting at home, but hey, we're not really at home in a strange way. And the telephone sort of brought that up to a certain degree. Um, UNESCO's World Digital Library also gets sort of released here. I don't know if that had to do with the Saraswati and taking those boundaries off Saraswati somehow. Because she's has some rulership here. So, oh, here we go. The ICC. I don't know that X is by accident. I hope it was. But the ICC International Criminal Court opens a case against child soldiers. It's like, of course, women hate these people, right? You're making children go to war, right? Of course, they're hated by them. Um, Here we see some WikiLeaks stuff coming out as well. War crime stuff, civilians killed, satellites. Rahu has something to do with oil, so it's. I think this Rahu coming through this transit, I think it's really good generally for the really good for like GDP and the industrial averages. I think generally speaking, there's some volatility on the oil industry to a certain degree. You can see a lot of wars for oil type stuff coming up through here as well. Of course, when I haven't studied economy stuff, but I sort of get this sense in the economy that when the price of oil goes up, the price of gold goes down. Everybody starts buying oil and not gold. When you get the opposite, oil's going down, I think the price of gold goes up. Oil's always, it's sort of like, it's always been known as being volatile. And whenever the economy generally gets volatile, everybody buys gold. When everybody buys gold, the price, of course, goes up. So, anyway, you're getting these economic indicators seem to be coming to a certain degree here. Now, to really get an idea of gold, we have to look at Jupiter, we have to look at other things. Um, I have a feeling next year my class, the courses that I give will just be Saturn and Jupiter, and so maybe the year after is when we'll really look at Saturn, Jupiter, Rahu all together. I know that's like 2 years away. I don't know. I don't know if you guys can't wait that long. Chop chop, get on it, folks. Um, please get on it, and then I can do something else in a couple of years. Um, so now we also get Doctors Without Borders. So it's not all bad, right? They're arming children, but they're also arming doctors and taking away borders from there. Uh, I call it Doctors Without Borders because I'm an English guy, but it was started by two French doctors. So it's Docteur Sans Frontières. It's interesting actually, because in English we say borders. In French they say frontiers. Um, and that's a very different way of actually looking at it because it's like looking at it in an affirmative way and a negative way, in a way. It's like we tantrics do when we say, well, everything's allowed, and the other guys say, well, nothing's allowed, in a way. Um, it just sort of it turns it around because, well, like I've often said, and I just wrote a huge long comment to who was it? One of Ava's comments um on tantrism and chasing after desires and stuff. One of our other friends writing, and I didn't post it because it was like it got so long that it was like You should just post that. This happens to my comments all the time, and half the time my comments do become posts, and this one will, I think, um, because it's just they go on and on. But it's this idea of like the reason everything is allowed for a tantric is because they have self-love and they have love for this universe, um, which is actually those two boundaries. They're not like nobody put up a fence, right? There, it's like giving you boundaries without giving you boundaries. But to have self-respect and self-love and now go act in the world, you're really, really bound. But you're free at the same time. So you get these strange things, right? And that's kind of Doctors Without Boundaries to a certain degree as well. There's a few Geneva Code conventions came up through here. It's like this idea of the doctor. It's like my doctor is going to go out and heal the enemy. Like it's just it's just not right on one hand, but on another hand, it's so beautifully right. So that's kind of Rahu and Ketu are kind of they're mixing things up like they do. They're doing their thing. Um, I talked about Catherine the Great, and now here's Queen Elizabeth. And so you're getting these women in power kind of things coming up with this. Um, I saw a few wars, POWs being repatriated at this time as well. And that was a funny thing, especially while this is the Vietnam War, and I don't know if it happened in Korea or not, probably. But I know in the Vietnam War they went to repatriate a lot of these POWs, and they went to bring a lot of their soldiers home, and there was a huge number of them that ended up staying in Vietnam because it became their home. And so it's like the enemy home became their home, not just a foreign land, but literally their country's enemy. And so you're getting these strange things that are coming across. Um, Aldous Huxley, Doors of Perception came out here. The MK Ultra, where the government experimented with LSD, that happened through this transit as well. Ketu seemed to really shake up the inside world, I guess, somehow, right? Really just removed all the boundaries from the inside. Here's some mescaline, here's some LSD. All those emotional boundaries are just gone. Um, so like that as well. It's kind of Ketu's funny that way. We talked about the numbing of the emotions. He sort of numbs and scatters that inner world, those inner boundaries. This might also be some of the, again, we talk about the aspects. Might we say this isn't some aspect of Ketu on Pisces, perhaps some leading to this like mescaline and LSD testing and stuff like this. The other part of that is like, well, the government was testing LSD. That's the 1950s government. That's so wrong for the government to be right testing something like LSD. Really? Like, how are you gonna right? The government has no right to test LSD, and in a way, it's like as long as LSD is being tested under the rigors of modern science, it's like they can't possibly get to the truth of LSD, right? Because the only way you can know the truth of LSD is to completely let go of all the rigors of modern anything, right? And you let go and you experience and right? It's really hard to bring the science into that to a certain degree. And so I think we're seeing some of that sort of effect with this Rahu Ketu thing. Even things like Eisenhower give a chance for peace speech. There was no peace in this man. He was a war machine. That whole period is war machine period. So peace of chance in this time, that's he's not. It's just Ketu. It's just a shadow of peace, a shadow of something. Um, Mao begins his long march. We talked about the this is in Shravana, but that marching band sort of aspect of the Dhanishta, that long march, that long, all that noise. How are you going to make noise? Well, I'm going to walk 6,000 kilometers, and maybe somebody will listen to me. Um, you see that these days, right? Truckers protests and things, right? It's about the protest isn't so much about like one place. It's about driving across. Of course, then they meet at one place, but it's about that journey in a sense. And usually also about crossing boundaries, state boundaries, and the EU. It's all the different countries, right? Crossing all their country boundaries, but like state boundaries. In the US, all the different states going crossing boundaries. So, oh gosh, I'm still like, God, I'm way behind here, way behind where I should be. Um, Now we move into Uttara shot. I'm going to start moving fairly quickly here because I think I've talked about a lot of general stuff, and so I'll try to find the stuff that sort of hits the nail on the head a little bit. And so we're getting into like a lot of the laws. That's one of the things about Capricorn, really, and even moving into Capricorn and moving into Sagittarius. They're both all about laws, really. Natural laws, man-made laws, theoretical rules and laws, all of this sort of stuff comes into here. Um, yeah, we even get like we talked about trying to the government trying to understand um something like LSD, right? And study the science of LSD. We see Alighieri, he sort of did the science of hell in a way as well and structured all that and sort of like told everybody it's a beautiful book. It's like if you really want to know history of the period, it's a great book because all the characters of the time, it was sort of a commentary. It was like writing a book now and sort of distinguishing what hell each of the politicians would end up in. Um, and I don't really understand why. Like I would really expect it says something about our education system, but I would almost expect someone to rewrite the divine comedy in every age, right? And fit all the politicians in there again, anew. Be like a brilliant book idea. People would love it, right? Um, I don't know. I really don't understand why that hasn't happened. Seems like just so simple. Um, because like other books, like the encyclopedias got started in this time. The World's Book of Guinness Records was somewhere through that. I think that was, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I think those got started in the um, Gemini part of this. World Book of Records and the encyclopedias, all that kind of stuff. We saw the thing here. I think it was education, maybe no boundaries to education. So you had that like big book project came in. The online, the Gutenberg project online, that came up somewhere through here. Um, some online learning stuff also came up through this transit as well. So we're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff. Um, it's interesting to see someone like Elvis Presley. He's a musician. We see some artists as well. I think the artists that have this are more the like Elvis Presley was like the well, one thing that was interesting that is coming up here as well. Some of these earlier transit was rock and roll music. Talked about the noise of the marching band. Well, what about the noise of rock and roll and Elvis Presley? These kind of guys. So that sort of noisiness was also sort of coming up through these areas. But Elvis Presley was like the corporate musician, really in a way, right? He was like the head of all that the industrial. That was the other thing. The industrial military project really seemed to be heavy here, but that's kind of what fascism sort of becomes. That heavy, overabundant industrial perspective, I guess you could say. Um, Dante used it for hell. Elvis did it, applied it to his music and recording and all of that. Um, and so you really did see at the time, like when the Berlin Wall fell, it was like it really was hyper Americanism was really what was going on at the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in a way, it's kind of interesting. You start looking at it this way, you see these old. It's almost like, I don't know if I can say this out loud. Someone's going to get offended. Hitler's project for fascism that he started back in the earlier days, when the Berlin Wall fell, that fascist project won. The hyper capitalism fascists really kind of won when the Berlin fall, and it spread all over the world, and it kind of consumed the whole world, and now the whole world is being run by fascist Hitler principles of industrialism and all of that. Oh, I should say this class is I'm literally getting sick at this moment. I am. Um, I just can't deal with it. It's like it all just goes against everything that's beautiful and holy in this world, and it's making me physically suffer.
It's like the game of Rahu and Ketu is to show you like destroying a wall that symbolizes something. And then once you destroy the symbol of something that was contained, it isn't contained anymore, but it's hidden.
Yeah,
So it's like the people who only, it's like very tantric, what they always say in Tantra, like nothing is what it seems. Nothing is what it seems. So it's like it looks good, but then everything is broken. Like for example, now what's happening with Gaza, all this, of course, it's a horrible war, but not only that, it's like a conflict that was geographically walled. Now
yeah,
it's an ideological world conflict, and we will see the consequences of that looking at the transits of Rahu and Ketu. And it's like that smokiness of confusion that people only see what's in front. It's very weird. I understand what you say, that it's making you sick, because it's like not everybody will see it, and it will only be seen in time.
yeah, yeah. It's like it's that Americanism when the wall came down. Everybody thought, oh, I'm going to be free. We're going to be free. The American way of life will free us. But now it's like, well, if the whole world is acting under the same principle, who is free? And so we saw that. I didn't see the start of things like IMF and World Bank, but I was seeing some frenzy for a bunch of countries to join them in different periods, joining the International Monetary, the World Fund, only these big, big, big things that it's like, yeah, like you say, they're going to make me free, but they don't. They do the opposite. Um, it's kind of like this idea of the government will save you, and everybody wants to put their reliance on the government. But no, it's strong communities. And it seems like, oh, that strong community, that social boundaries, and I'm not free because my society is, but no, you're free because of your boundaries of society. And so now and Ketu are just obliterating all of it. So it was interesting. It was through this period, first billionaire. Um, Ford Motor Company was the first company to make more than $1 billion in a year. A few little things like this, right? The billionaire, now we're probably on to trillionaires, right? Um, these sorts of things. So that's all. Everybody wants to be a billionaire, man. Yeah, Mary Pickford gets the first $1 million contract in Hollywood. And so it's all that, right? Oh, stars and stripes forever. There's a theme song of today's thing. You get things like the Boy Scouts as well, some Girl Scouts. No, it wasn't Girl Scouts, maybe them too, but it's Cub Scouts in the UK. These sort of scouting practices, things like that. Oh, now we're on to Aditi, that beautiful womb and mother of the universe. Yeah, there we go. Punarvasu is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. We talk about it as being, well, I don't know, almost from Punarvasu going all the way back to uh to Ashvini, really is this beautiful motherly, this inward nurturing, because you see a lot of like by Punarvasu, we're getting into people who are sort of like giving birth to like animals and taking care of animals in a lot of way. Well, when you go a little bit further back, you're getting more like Bharani and so all, but all through this, you're getting that very nice motherly instinct in a way to care for animals, to take care of like that's the motherly to take care of the lowest, right? Isn't that the great motherly instinct? And so really Punarvasu is quite beautiful through her Aditi. I find Punarvasu sort of seems a little bit hard in a lot of ways. It can be a little black and white. Um, but it's also such a beautiful, beautiful nakshatra. Um, oh yeah, I've got some good stuff there, but I'm gonna scroll through it because we don't have time. Um, we get some more, we get some more really powerful people. Um, Abdul Rashid Dostum of Afghanistan. He's sort of a anyways, he's sort of an American puppet guy, but he was quite powerful. He's gone missing, I think. I'm not sure. I think he's disappeared. I don't know what happened to him. Anyway, so so but he was sort of an Afghan warlord fighting for the American side. And of course, like every American warlord, he got backstabbed by the Americans and he's just disappeared since then. Dalai Lama's there as well. I saw things like the CIA got started through some of these transits and things like this as well. And I've said all the time Dalai Lama was a CIA asset as well. Stonewall Jackson was a military guy. Interesting, Stonewall Jackson. There's Stonewall Jackson. He was famous. He could like for building walls and keeping like stone wall to keep the enemy out. But he also was pretty good at obliterating walls and getting through walls as well. That's what a good military person does, really, is destroys the walls. Um, Someone like Oprah Winfrey, we're seeing again those strong women. She's done like well, if anyone has what can I say, destroyed the woman's role in the home. Oprah Winfrey's been like, she's just been a master at that. Um, that sort of stuff. Zaza Gabor with her 9 marriages, um, things like this. Wade Davies, he's another kind of one of my gurus. He's still writing, and actually, no, he just retired from university life, but he's written a lot on adventurers and explorers and people that have done just great things, no boundaries kind of stuff, right? Um, I was seeing also, that was what happened here. I think it was by the time I actually got, maybe it was coming here in the Gemini's part of this stuff, was first someone summited Mount Everest, and then they summited Kajarango, and then they summited Annapurna, and then they summited the K4, 2, 3. Anyways, the K, the big one. And so there was like every time I went to a new position of Rahu and Ketu, someone was summiting now the fourth tallest, now the third tallest, now the and so there was something of these steps working their way to the peak in a way of that we look at Capricorn sort of stuff. Um this is when all the just before the big Iraq war in the 90s when the UN was sort of calling on Saddam Hussein to get rid of all his chemical biological weapons. The word nuclear wasn't coming up here, so I don't know if they just threw that in a little bit later in the argument. Um, and he kept saying like, I have no biological weapons. And it was kind of funny when the run up to this war, because they're like, get rid of your biological weapons, and they're like, I don't have any biological weapons. And they would say like, you're not letting us destroy your biological weapons, and he'd say, I don't have any. And then they like, and it was just really like, I remember the build up to that. It was really, really strange. And they had no proof of any biological weapons either. Same like no nuclear weapons. But they kept saying like, we're gonna kill you until you destroy these weapons. And I don't have any. Like, like this, right? It's like, I'm gonna beat you up unless you give me $10. And it's like, I don't have $10. And so obviously he got beaten up. Um, we can see here we go. Dow Jones Industrial Average up for the 3,000 for the first time in history. That was in the 90s. It's probably way up beyond that. And so we see the focus is on industry, on building, um, things like that. So, oh yeah, the Rodney King beating. There was huge riots after that, right? And again, this is something along the lines of, I think this is affecting like the police. That idea of the police are supposed to protect us, but the police are beating the heck out of this poor guy, right? So that's that Rahu and Ketu kind of like those protectors of Capricorn just aren't doing their right job. And yeah, anyways, so there's kind of problems. Warsaw Pact exchange. I was seeing a few big military agreements. Southeast Asia, there was a bunch. The Africans, they made a bunch of agreements to sort of get together um, and work together to a certain degree. This is way back 1954. This is where the big Ukraine problem started. This is when Gorbachev first gave the Crimea to Ukraine. Was back in there. The Americans put the Shah of Iran. Was that here? Installed the Shah of Iran in Iran, and that just continued for a brutal dictatorship for years and years. And that's sort of like that's really where the problem in Iran that we've started. You looked at this, and then you would say if you see a spot earlier than this, and say it started then. But the current government in Iran, the reason they hate the USA so much is because the USA put the Shah in power for so many years and just brutalized Iran by it. Really, wasn't very nice. And so that's, I don't know if it's the Iranian government, and well, at least 50% of Iranians really, really like just hate the US because of this. Because they've sort of like, they keep saying that hegemon, that dirty, they want to put the puppet, and they say this because they've seen the US do it in a way, and because they installed the Shah back at this time. Again, Shah of Iran was a lot like Hitler and a lot of those other guys. So, oh, we see also now the Marshall Plan being instituted to post-war recovery in Europe. Again, big plan for industrialization. Build, reindustrialize sort of ideas coming out. So I was hoping to get all the way through Gemini's, but I'm hoping, wait a sec, all the way through Gemini? No. Gemini's tomorrow, isn't it? It is tomorrow. I'm way ahead of myself. And I thought I was way behind, guys. But we're way ahead. So we're gonna rewind. Look at that. There's Rahu and Ketu, man. That's just like, I can't even do this, and I'm doing it. Um oh, got something else going on here. Let's just go to here. That's crossing the line. Okay. So Uttara and Pushya. It was interesting as well. I noticed this back in, where was it? It was a Dhanishta placement. We talked about these reversals and these strange things. There was this like, nobody really knew what it was. It was back in the 50s, I think. And some strange creature washed ashore. And they figured it was like a giant octopus. Maybe it was a giant squid. Not really sure. And I was looking at this octa, this eight, and I was looking at at the eight vasus, and I was thinking like, but there was nothing to really like suggest an octopus. And I thought, oh, because anyway, so I thought, oh, well, this is the Rahu and Ketu thing is making it backwards. Now we're getting this octopus up on land. So of course it's a dead octopus. It was a giant, strange, squiddy thing. Nobody really knew. But it was kind of interesting thing to think of the eight with the eight Vasus, anyways, relating with Octa, and in a position that really didn't have much to do, like it's very dry and landy for the most part, except across from the, if we're thinking of the polarity, then you get the Cancer on the other side. And so there's something there to do with, anyways, the Octa and the octopus and the waters over there. And as usual, I don't know what I'm talking about. Um, we saw, geez, I jumped ahead of myself already. Well, that was some of the other things I was seeing here as well. So we get that hyper industrialism of the Dhanishta, but there's a, what can you say? There's a snapback to that, right? So you get that in, hard industrialism, but I was also seeing, and I was really only finding a few clues for it because, of course, they don't get a lot of attention. But this, like, it was like in Hitler's time, he would talk about the degenerate art. And so you get this sort of anti-industrial art. I don't know if you've ever heard of the movement. I think it's called Dadaism. I I saw it while I was da, anyway, Dadaism. And so what they did basically they just tried to make fun the fun of all the hoity-toity art sort of idea, right? And so they, I don't know, a Dadaist thing, they might put a display a toilet in the Museum of Fine Art, for example, right? And here's your fine art. And they might take a poo in that toilet before they display it as well. They do this really sort of grotesque, sort of counter art, right? Um, what I would say is usually, like I usually see it as being very Venus and Libra, right? Like extolling the ugliness as being beautiful in a way. But I think what's going on here is they're not making so much comment about the ugly or beautiness of a thing. They're they're commenting on the cultural aspect of it, I guess. Um, and so it was kind of interesting to see that sort of snapback of a lot of what we're looking at here is the industrial this and the power and the fascist. But whenever someone rises up and says, like, well, I'm a fascist, I'm now the emperor of the world, and I can, a lot of kind of micromanaging sort of stuff came up through this as well. But whenever you get someone who is going to micromanage, you got someone on the other side who's no, 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 it's not going to happen. And so you get this more likeliness of rebellion and revolt and sort of well, that's how the fascist got his position was through the already some kind of imbalance going on in power and in culture and society. And so that's all going to get highlighted from the well, from the dictator who wants to micromanage to the hippie who's going to just say like no boundaries, no rule, just give me some LSD, dude. Um, and so you're going to get both sides of that, I think, through this positioning. Any other questions or comments? Well, here's Dadaism, an art movement that rejected logic, reason, and asceticism of modern capitalist society, instead expressing nonsense, irrationality, and anti-bourgeois protest through their work. This is really popular these days. Um, it's funny. I was looking at oh, who is it? She's not here, but she should be. She's following. Andrian. I'm sure Dana knows Andreanne by this point. I don't know if Katrina's sort of followed her. She's very close to this kind of Dadaism, her art. Kind of interesting. She does nice stuff. It's never going to become like she's never going to become popular. Dadists are never looking to become popular in a way. It's kind of like they're anti all of that. And so they're doing all this absurd, irrational sort of stuff as a commentary. It's like their art isn't meant to be beautiful, it's meant to teach, I guess you could say. It's a strange way of teaching, right? But that's that Ketu over there in Cancer doing that. It's funny, Andrea, she's touched a couple times. I don't know how you could say. She's done normal art a few times. And when she does, it's like, wow, she could probably quite easily reach the top. She's got so much talent to do all of that. I think I've kind of run into a bit of this sort of Dadaism perspective as well. This anti-capitalistic sort of perspective in my work as well, where it's like there's certain things I know I could do it that would make me popular and make me rise and stuff like that. But I've got this like, well, it makes me sick. I get physically ill if I do that kind of stuff, right? For me, it would be selling out in a way. And so if not selling out means that I'll never be popular, then selling out, it's like, well, that's my definition of selling out, and I'm pretty sensitive, and so I'm probably never going to be popular. Um, um, but that's kind of what the Dadaism sort of does, I guess. So you got this sort of kind of interesting. Here's the millionth Ford car rolled off the assembly line. It was another section, but they did actually, it was the first billion company to make $1 billion in a year. Um, there we go. People's Republic of China. I get so confused in history because there was a time when you had the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China, and they were both like vying for power. And it's like, who the heck is who? Um, and that went on for quite a while. There was, a lot of, I don't know if this will come up. I wasn't seeing it earlier in the Pisces and the certainly not in the Pisces, but I was seeing like um a lot of the tornado news was coming up. I don't know if the rest of the world, there's other parts of the world that have really bad tornadoes like central USA and even central Canada is really, really bad for tornadoes. But there are some brutal years through these transits of the tornadoes. And I don't know if that was that propeller spinning, causing things like that. Um, yeah, it's hard to say. I'm thinking of some of the disasters that happened through these periods. Um, and it's hard to sort disasters out from because that's just this earth, our mother nature. I'm sorry, ladies, but women are crazy, right? She's chaos. That's just the way she is. And so she's just like hits us again and again. This time it's a tornado, then it's an earthquake, and now it's a tsunami, and now it's a God knows what and where it's going to happen. God bless you, Ma. Have mercy. Um, but I was noticing tornadoes is the point. Um, that was the other thing. There were some things like Emma Goldman got arrested for in the USA for lecturing on birth control. A lot of birth control things were coming up in this period. Planned Parenthood. It wasn't Planned Parenthood. It was before Planned Parenthood. There was another company. They started a lot of that abortion stuff was coming up out here. Again, it seems very. This is fully like anti-mama, basically. Um, yeah, this is fully against the mama. This position of stuff. So Emma Goldman, she was an interesting character. She was like this, that was this period in the 1915, 1916. This was like, again, you had like the anarchists. Emma Goldman was like one of these anarchists. The anarchist philosophies were just sort of coming out. And again, that's the opposite to the fascists, right? And so you have this, both sides of this coming out. Um, politics, just Rahu just really highlighting the politics nature of things and the different politics of it. And then I think Ketu is wanting to make the whole world the same politics because that's the only way we're ever going to get along is if we all just live under the same system, right? And that makes sense, right? Even when I say it, it's like, oh, actually, that would probably be good for the world, right? A world police, just the same system of laws for the whole world. These kind of ideas, they kind of, and I think they're going to keep making sense as Rahu goes through Sagittarius, right? But these kind of ideas, it's like, wow, that really like that seems like a really good idea. And when I say it, even when I say it, I'm like, wow, that actually like why not? Right? But you've got to think about something after you say it. Or maybe they say before you say it. But if you didn't think about it before, think about it after. Um, because Rahu and Ketu are going to make confusion of everything. So we're down to about maybe last 10 minutes. Any questions? Anywhere that's going with this? The description of the DNA double helix was in this period. Um, that's very Shravan in a way, like a ladder, maybe like Shravan. And then in that inner, the DNA. I'm usually comparing DNA. I usually see that in Taurus. Again, maybe it's an aspect from Cancer going over to Taurus that's affecting this. Cancer is like familiar, very civic. I don't know. There's going to be DNA stuff all the way through this, but this was certainly the double helix part of the DNA got understood to a certain degree. I found doors of perception interesting as well because Capricorn is so much about walls in a way, and then, well, I guess those walls need a door. Doors are the openings. Um, but it's like I don't know. Normally, you open a door and you just go in the next room. Aldous Huxley, it was like you open the door and oh, right. If you go into this, like, well, you go into Ketu, I guess. That's the perception. Wow, right? However, they do that. Um, there was also, it was through this period, was it masculine? I think it was some television show back in this period, and they hyped someone up. I can't remember if it was Acid. They recorded the whole thing. And if you go to YouTube, you see some of those recordings today, just wild, like some square 1950s dude is just right flipping out on acid for the first time. And I've often said it's like those squares, they're the ones who need the acid. It's like for us to be doing acid, we're just abusing it, really. But a square Hitler needed to do a little acid, right? Winston Churchill, a little mescaline, a little hit of mushrooms might have done him some good, right? I shouldn't say that because I think Hitler was Hitler was on about 10 different kinds of drugs, and it didn't do him any good at all. But but maybe he was doing the industrial drugs. He should have been doing mushrooms and the natural stuff. I don't know. Um, Got a few cults here too. Came up with this sort of stuff. Maybe that was getting more into the Gemini stuff. So that kind of things. So the home, the motherhood, the perception, the education, all of that is sort of being changed to adjust for the governments and the industrial nature of things. Does that sum up the class? Any other better sum ups for today? Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, dudes. Like the Stairway to Heaven. he didn't just like, I don't know, he didn't just become CEO. He went all the way to heaven. That's pretty intense stairway, if you ask me. So that's that Rahu, I guess, on the Rahu side of things. You can go anywhere. So these sorts of things. The Mars lander makes it to the surface of Mars and transmits for a couple seconds, and then it got destroyed. Um, and so that's go anywhere, stairway to space, stairway to heaven. So that was, stairway to heaven. That was that same era, rock and roll. They were doing a lot of these. I'm thinking more of the Dhanishta side of things, but they were doing those like, remember the rock operas, like the rock and roll that went on for like, God, there's that one famous song that goes on for like 20 minutes or something. That's like unheard of in rock and roll. But that seems to me was some of this, like some of this can come in here. But in any case, that Rahu going through Dhanishta seems to really, music becomes noise, right? And that's a generational thing, right? And so there's always going to be more noise to be made. So it'd be interesting to look back and just the latest transit past when it went past Dhanishta and see what kind of noise was being made there. I don't know, guys. I think I think we're going to call that a class for today, unless there's any questions or comments. As you know, I'm looking like at austerity measures in Peru and riots starting there, and that seems to be the way. It's um, the whole banking in 2008, too big to fail, right? It was like all that. How many people lost their homes so we could save the banks, right? It's like all of that stuff is going on through this transit. Um, World Health Organization removes homosexuality from their list of diseases. Now, I'm going to keep my mouth shut at this one. I'm going to plead the fifth. I'm no going to say no more, and we'll leave that at that. Um, because there's trouble brewing. 88 tornadoes in central USA, right? More devastating tornadoes. And so you had a lot of this sort of stuff go on that way. So we'll leave it with that. And I'm going to say namaste. I'll stick around after I stop sharing and everything like that. I'm here. Anybody wants to talk or share anything?